Mercedes just went from having one of the smartest advantages on the grid to being directly targeted by an emergency FIA plan that could erase it overnight. We're talking about a system so effective it helped manage a crisis where cars can suddenly lose up to 50 km per hour on straights, and now, that exact advantage is being cut down before other teams can catch up. Inside Formula One, the reaction is intense. Because this isn't just a rule tweak. It's a direct hit on performance, a shift in power, and a clear signal that the FIA is ready to step in whenever one team gets too far ahead in solving a broken system. And if this move lands the way many expect, Mercedes won't just lose speed. They could lose control of the entire fight. At first, this didn't look like a move against Mercedes. It looked like a response to a bigger problem. Because across the grid, something was already going wrong. The cars were fast, yes, but they couldn't sustain that speed when it mattered most. On paper, everything worked. High downforce, strong grip, impressive cornering. But on the straights, the reality was different. The cars weren't just accelerating. They were fighting the air. And that fight was draining energy faster than anyone expected. Now here's where things start to connect. Because in this new era, performance isn't just about speed. It's about efficiency. Half of the car's power comes from electrical energy. And that energy has limits. Strict limits. So if your car demands too much power to cut through the air, your battery empties faster. And when it empties, the car loses a huge part of its performance instantly. We're talking about massive drops in speed, right in the middle of a straight. That's the crisis. And that's the environment Mercedes stepped into. While other teams focused on maximizing downforce, maximizing grip, maximizing peak performance, Mercedes looked at the problem differently. They asked a simple question. What if the key isn't having more, but needing less? So instead of just chasing raw performance, they worked on balance, reducing drag, improving airflow, making the car more efficient across the entire lap. And that's where they found something powerful. Because if your car moves through the air more cleanly, it uses less energy. If it uses less energy, the battery lasts longer. And if the battery lasts longer, you avoid the biggest weakness of these cars. That sudden loss of power. So while others were forced to manage, to hold back, to calculate, Mercedes could push longer, more consistently. And that kind of advantage doesn't always show up in one lap. It shows up over time. Lap after lap. Stint after stint. Race after race. But here's the problem. In Formula One, when one team finds a smarter way to solve a system issue, it doesn't stay theirs for long. Other teams notice. They study it. They question it. And eventually, they push for it to be controlled. Now add the context. This isn't happening in a stable system. This is happening in the middle of a technical crisis. Cars losing speed unexpectedly. Drivers frustrated. The FIA under pressure to act. So when they look at Mercedes, they don't just see innovation. They see a team solving a problem that the system itself hasn't fixed yet. And that creates imbalance. Because if one team can manage the crisis better than the rest, the gap doesn't just increase. It becomes locked in. And that's exactly what Formula One tries to avoid. So the FIA steps in. Not slowly. Not later. Now. And that's the moment where everything starts to shift. And this is where the situation stops being quiet and turns into a direct intervention. Because once the FIA understood what was happening, they didn't wait. They acted. An emergency plan, focused on aerodynamics, aimed at limiting exactly the kind of advantage Mercedes had built. Not next season. Not in the long term. Right now. And that's what changes everything. Because in Formula One, timing is just as important as the rule itself. If a change comes later, teams adapt. If it comes now, it hits instantly. And for Mercedes, that means one thing. Whatever edge they had, is now under pressure. Immediately. But here's where it gets even more intense. This isn't just about slowing a team down. It's about controlling a system that is already unstable. Because the FIA isn't only reacting to Mercedes. They're reacting to the bigger issue. Cars that demand too much energy. Cars that lose power unpredictably. Cars that force drivers to manage instead of attack. So when they target downforce behavior, they're trying to reduce the root cause. Less drag. Less energy demand. More stability on the straights. But in doing that, they also hit the teams that were best at managing that balance. And that's exactly where Mercedes stands. Because their advantage wasn't random. It was built around understanding that balance better than anyone else. So when the rules shift, the entire foundation of that advantage starts to move. Now imagine being inside that team. Every simulation you trusted, suddenly less reliable. Every setup you optimized, suddenly needs rethinking. Every gain you made, suddenly at risk. And you don't have time. Because the races don't stop. The competition doesn't wait. And the other teams are already reacting. Some are pushing harder, sensing opportunity. If Mercedes loses even a small percentage of performance, the gap closes. Others are watching carefully. Because if the FIA is willing to step in like this, no advantage is safe. And that changes how everyone approaches development. Less certainty. More risk. More pressure. But here's the part that makes this even bigger. This emergency move isn't the end. It's the beginning. Because while this change affects the present, the FIA is already preparing something much larger for the future. A potential reduction of up to 50 points of downforce. A complete shift in aerodynamic philosophy. So Mercedes is not just dealing with a hit today. They are facing a future where the entire concept they built around could disappear. And that creates a decision that no team wants to make. Do you keep fighting to protect what you have now? Or do you start rebuilding for what's coming next? Either way, you risk losing something. And in Formula One, that kind of uncertainty is dangerous. Because the teams that hesitate fall behind. And the teams that guess wrong pay the price. So now everything comes down to one thing. Adaptation. Not just speed. Not just performance. But the ability to survive when the rules change underneath you. Because what's happening to Mercedes right now isn't just a setback. It's a test. And how they respond to it could define their position in the next era of Formula One. And now we arrive at the point where this stops being just Mercedes' problem and becomes a warning for the entire sport. Because what just happened sends a very clear message. If you solve the system better than everyone else, the system itself might change. And that changes how every team thinks moving forward. Imagine investing months, even years, into one concept. Perfecting it. Building your entire car around it. And just when it starts to give you an edge, it gets limited. Not because it's illegal, but because it works too well within a flawed system. That's exactly the line Formula One is walking right now. And that's why this moment feels different. Because it's not about catching a loophole. It's about controlling the direction of the sport. Now here's where the consequences go deeper. Teams are no longer just asking, how do we go faster? They're asking something else. How far can we go before it gets taken away? And that question changes everything. Because innovation in Formula One has always been about pushing limits. But when those limits become uncertain, risk becomes harder to justify. Do you go aggressive and risk losing everything? Or do you stay conservative and risk falling behind? There's no safe path anymore. Only different types of danger. And this is where the bigger picture starts to reveal itself. Because the FIA isn't just reacting to Mercedes. They're reacting to a system that has reached its limits. High downforce creates high drag. High drag creates high energy demand. And high energy demand leads to the biggest issue of all. Cars losing power in the middle of a straight. That's the core of the crisis. And no matter how teams try to work around it, that limitation remains. So instead of letting teams solve it individually, the FIA is stepping in to reshape the environment itself. And that leads to something much bigger than one rule change. A shift in philosophy. From allowing teams to find extreme solutions, to guiding how those solutions are allowed to exist. And this is where the future starts to take form. Because if the sport is already considering removing up to 50 points of downforce, then what Mercedes is experiencing now is just an early version of what's coming. A transition. From one type of Formula One to another. And in that transition, one thing becomes clear. The teams that survive won't just be the fastest. They'll be the ones that adapt the quickest. Because performance can be built, but adaptability is tested. And right now, Mercedes is in the middle of that test. They've lost part of their advantage. They're facing uncertainty. And they're being forced to respond in real time. But here's the final layer that makes this moment so important. This isn't happening at the end of a cycle. It's happening in the middle of one. Which means the decisions made now will echo into the next era. So the real question isn't just whether Mercedes can recover. It's whether they can evolve faster than the rules changing around them. Because if they can, this moment becomes a setback. But if they can't, this becomes the moment where the balance of power quietly begins to shift. And this is where everything finally comes together, because the real impact of this decision hasn't even been seen yet. Up to this point, Mercedes is reacting, adapting, trying to protect what they built. But the next phase is where the true consequences appear. Because once the rules shift like this, performance doesn't just drop evenly across the grid. It redistributes. And that's the moment where winners and losers are truly defined. Think about it. If Mercedes loses efficiency, even slightly, that gap doesn't disappear into nothing. It goes somewhere. To another team. To another concept. To someone who suddenly finds themselves closer than they've been all season. And in Formula One, that's all it takes. A small shift becomes a position gained. A position gained becomes pressure. Pressure becomes mistakes. And suddenly, the entire championship dynamic starts to move. But here's where it gets even more unpredictable. Because not every team will be affected the same way. Some cars rely heavily on aerodynamic stability. Others rely more on mechanical balance. Some drivers thrive with high grip. Others are stronger when the car becomes unstable. So when you change something as fundamental as downforce behavior, you're not just changing speed. You're changing the entire ecosystem of performance. And that's why this moment is so dangerous. Because nobody truly knows where they will land. Not even Mercedes. And that uncertainty spreads everywhere. Into strategy. Into setup decisions. Into how aggressively teams push development. Because now, every upgrade becomes a gamble. Will it still work under the new conditions? Will it still give an advantage, or expose a weakness? And while teams try to answer those questions, the calendar keeps moving. Races keep coming. Points keep being scored. And there's no time to fully reset. Only time to react. But here's the part that changes everything. This situation is forcing teams into a completely different mindset. Before, the goal was clear. Maximize performance within the rules. Now, the goal is more complex. Maximize performance, while anticipating how the rules might change. And that creates a new kind of pressure. Because you're not just competing against other teams. You're competing against uncertainty. And uncertainty is impossible to fully control. Which brings everything back to Mercedes. Because right now, they are not just fighting to stay fast. They are fighting to stay relevant in a system that is evolving faster than expected. They have to adapt quickly. Make the right decisions under pressure. And avoid falling into the trap that has caught so many teams before. Holding on to a concept for too long, while the sport moves in a different direction. And that leads to the final realization. This isn't just a moment of tension. It's a turning point. A moment where Formula One is quietly redefining how performance is created, controlled, and limited. And for Mercedes, this is the moment that will reveal something much bigger than speed. It will reveal whether they can evolve faster than the rules designed to stop them.